NCERT Social Science Class 6 Chapter 4 What Book and Burial Tell Us. Let us get into the chapter. One of the oldest book in the world. Vedas are the oldest book in the world. The four Vedas that we know are Sama, Rig, Yajur and Atharvana Veda. The oldest Veda is the Rigveda, which was composed about 3500 years ago. It includes more than 1000 hymns called Sukta or well said. These hymns are in praise of the gods and goddesses. Three gods are Agni, god of fire, Indra, a warrior god, Soma, a plant from which a special drink was prepared. The hymn was composed by sage and rishis. Priests taught students to recite and memorize each syllable, word, and sentence. A few were composed by women. The language Sanskrit is a little different that is there in Rigveda rather than the one that we study in school today. Rigveda was recited and heard. It wasn't written for a long time. It was about 200 years ago that it was first composed and printed less than those years. Sanskrit and other languages. Sanskrit is a part of a family of language known as Indo-European. Some Indian languages such as Assami, Gujarati, Hindi, Kashmir and Sindhi, Asian languages such as Persian and many European languages such as English, French, German, Greek, Italian and Spanish belong to this family. They are called family because they originally had words in common. Take the word Matar, Sanskrit, Ma is Hindi and mother is English. So it becomes Matar in Sanskrit. Other languages used in the subcontinent belong to different families. For instance, those used in Northeast belong to Tibeto-Burman family. Tamil, Telugu, Kannada and Malayalam belong to the Dravidian family. And the languages spoken in Jharkhand and parts of central India belong to Austro-Asiatic family. How historians read Rigveda. Rigveda was recited and heard rather than read. We already saw this. It was written after several centuries and it was originally composed and printed only 200 years ago. We saw this point also earlier. Some of the hymns are in the form of dialogues. One was between sage Vishwamitra and two rivers, Beas and Sutlej, which was worshipped like goddess. That dialogue has been shown in the pop-up now. There's another continuation of how Rigveda was read by historians. There was a manuscript of Rigveda which was found out on the birch bark and it was found in Kashmir. About 150 years ago, it was used to prepare one of the earliest printed texts of the Rigveda and was as well as English translation is also available. It is now preserved in the library of Pune, Maharashtra. Cattle, horses and chariots. There were many prayers in Rigveda for cattle, children, especially son, and horses. Horses were yoked to chariots in battle, which were fought to capture cattle. Battles were also fought for lands, which was important for pasture, and growing hardy crops, which riped quickly like barley. Some battle was fought for water and to capture people. The wealth captured were kept by leaders. Some was given to the priests. The rest was distributed among the people. Some wealth was used for performing yagnas or sacrifice offerings and was put in the fire. Offerings were ghee, grain, sometimes animals also. There was no trained armies. Most of the men took part in these wars. They also chose a leader who was brave and was a skilled warrior. Words to describe people. There were many ways to describe people in terms of language, work they did, place they belong to, family, the communities, culture, etc. The two groups described in Rigveda are priests, sometimes called as Brahmins, who perform various rituals, and the Rajas, who were sons succeeding their father. Two words were used to describe the community. One was Jana, the other was Vish or Vishya, Vaishya. Many Vish and Janas are mentioned. Some are Bharata Jana or Vish, Yatu Jana or Vish. People who composed called themselves as Aryans and called their opponents as Dasa or Dasyus. They probably spoke different languages. They were called as Dasis, men and women, which means slaves who do all type of work for their owners. We saw microliths in about few chapters ago. Now it is all about megaliths. We have to know the silent story of megaliths. The stone boulders were known as megaliths, which was very big in size. They were carefully arranged by people to mark the burial sites. When they bury the people, they put the boulders there and they are marked to know who it belonged to. The practice of erecting megaliths started 3000 years ago. It was prevalent throughout Deccan, all the states under Deccan. This was happening. Southeast India, Northeast, and Kashmir also had the same practice. Some megaliths were found on the surface and some underground also. The common feature of megaliths are dead were buried with distinctive pots of red and black. That is, red and black pots were buried along with the dead body. Sometimes horse skeleton and horse material were also found. This shows horses were also buried along with the dead. Sometimes tools and weapons made of iron, ornaments of gold and stone were also found. This all shows people buried all this along with the dead body to help them in their next life. Finding about the social differences. Some bodies were found with ornaments of gold beads and bronze bangles. Some were buried only with pots. This shows that there was social difference and a difference in their status. Some were rich, some were poor, some were chief, and some were followers. Sometimes megaliths were found with more than one skeleton, stating that the family members were all buried in the same place. The boulders had a porthole through which they indicate the visit often. Inamgaon is a place on the river God, a tributary of Bhima. This was occupied 2500 to 3000 years ago. Here, adults were buried with head at the north. Sometimes burials were within the house. Vessel containing food and water was kept along the dead. One man was buried in a large jar in the courtyard of 5 rooms. This house was one of the largest houses in the settlement with a granary. The body was placed cross-legged position. What skeletal studies tell us? It was easy to make out the skeleton of a child from its small size. However, there are no major difference in the bones of the girl and the boy, so you cannot differentiate that. Sometimes people decided on the base of what was found on the skeleton. For instance, if a skeleton was found with jewelry, it is sometimes thought to be that of a woman. However, the problem with this, often men also wore ornaments. A better way of figuring out the sex of the skeleton is to look at the bone structure. The hip or the pelvic area of a woman is generally larger or enables childbearing. These distinctions are based on modern skeletal study. About 2000 years ago, there were a famous physician named Charaka who wrote a book on medicine known as Charaka Samhita. There he states the human body has 360 bones. This is much larger number than the 200 bones that was recognized in the modern anatomy. Charaka arrived at this figure by counting the teeth joint and the cartilage also. Occupation at Inam Gaon. Archaeologists found grains of wheat, rice, barley, peas, millets, and sesame in this place. Number of animal bones with cut mark was found. This shows they were used for food. The animals were goat, buffalo, cattle, sheep, dog, horse, ass, pig, sambar, spotted deer, black buck, antelope, hare, and mongoose. Besides, birds, crocodile, turtle, crab, and fish. There were evidence of fruits such as ber, amla, jamun, dates, and a variety of berries were also collected. While this was happening in India, what else happened throughout the world? There's a place in the Atlas called China. Around 3,500 years ago, we found some of the first evidence of writing. The writing was done on the animal bones. The bones were called as oracle bones. These bones were used for predicting the future. Kings got scribes to write questions on the bones, which was then burnt in the fire and cracked because of the heat. Then fortune tellers studied these cracks and tried to predict the future. As you may expect, they sometimes made mistakes. These kings lived in palaces and cities. They amassed vast quantities of wealth, including large, elaborated, decorated bronze vessels were also found by the archaeologists. This shows there were evidence throughout the world also.